This is Steve Hayes at the EPRA Annual Conference. I have with me here Eamonn D'Arcy, who is from the University of Reading Henley Business School. Eamonn, welcome.
Thank you.
Eamonn, you're very well known for the research you've done on the internationalisation of real estate. How do REITs fit into that story?
I think REITs are quite an important part of the internationalisation story, which is, has taken place at many different levels in real estate markets. I think REITs in particular create the sort of conditions necessary for the internationalisation of the capital raising base in the markets in which they've been introduced, which is very important in terms of bringing new sources of capital to those markets and improving liquidity conditions. Also, I think looking particularly at the French experience, I think transparency is a key output of the introduction of a vibrant REIT regime and improvements in transparency, not just in the listed sector, but right across the investment sector.
You've done a great deal of research work on the internationalisation of real estate. How do REITs fit into that picture?
Okay, well, real estate markets globally have experienced rapid internationalisation on a range of levels over the last 20 years. In terms of REITs' particular contribution, I think the key impact in countries where REIT regimes have been introduced has been the internationalisation of the capital raising base in those countries, which has introduced new sources of liquidity to those particular markets. At a wider level, I think it's contributed to improvements in transparency in those markets, not just related to listed real estate, but also to the wider investment market. Also, I think it's allowed sector specialists to emerge in those markets because of the access to capital. And historically, if you look at REIT regimes, Australia is a very good example. You see sector specialists like Westfield having emerged on the back of access to capital.
You mentioned Australia, but are there markets in Europe where REITs have made a particular impact?
I think France is the classic case. Maybe it's a case of advantageous timing when REITs were introduced in 2003 in France, but I think they've dramatically improved the transparency of the French investment market and contributed to much greater liquidity and indeed transparency in the French commercial real estate market.
In times like this, where there's a lot of volatility in the markets and turmoil generally in the economies, particularly in Europe and the States, do people turn to real estate? Do investors turn to real estate in its listed and non-listed forms? Or do they turn away from real estate in these times?
I think to some extent the outputs of this crisis, real estate has got some bad press. There's no point in saying it hasn't, particularly in terms of the exposure of the banking sector. I think it's probably positive for listed real estate because it sort of almost makes a case for listed real estate in terms of widening the capital raising base of the sector and taking away its dependence on bank finance. I mean, particularly I can say this with some confidence being Irish, the Irish case is a classic illustration of overdependence on bank finance for a real estate sector. And I think at a wider level, one would hope that investors are looking at what we would call the opportunity costs of committing financial capital to different types of investment. And I think investors will commit to real estate if the opportunity costs of essentially real estate, the returns available in real estate compared to the best alternative use for their financial capital are attractive.
Turning to EPRA itself now, are there particular areas you'd like EPRA to concentrate on in its research activities?
Well, as the chairperson of the EPRA Research Committee, I think part of my remit is to ensure that the research output commissioned by EPRA supports particularly investor outreach in terms of making the case for investment in listed real estate. At a wider level, I would hope that we also serve the interests of the EPRA members in terms of the research we're producing. And overall, I think a key principle is quality of research is quite important. In terms of EPRA, it currently and its objectives, I think very much there are issues, particularly in the European context, in terms of regulation, which is following up. And I think in terms of research, there's a lot of research available on US REITs because of the longer history. And I think there's a research deficit in Europe on listed real estate, which I think EPRA can make a huge contribution to over the next 4 or 5 years.
Eamonn, thank you very much for your time. For this and other industry interviews, please go to REIT.com and EPRA.com.